Can you hear me now? Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the slight delay, but things run over. I'm assured by Greg everything was fine with me and Lee and everybody and Rachel, and everything was covered so that we were all good to be in the room. So I'll just move on straight away, and would I ask you to move to part one, the minutes, to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 17th of July. Could I have the... Right, thank you. Just move on. Is there any apologies at all? I know Robert's, I don't know where the book. There you go. I've got apologies from Councillor Duncan, and there is another one there, Councillor Nelson. Thank you. Just moving on now. Is there any declarations of interest from anybody in the panel? No, councillors? No. Thank you. And straight away to item 4 on the agenda, a report from the South Staffs Council, report of the licensing investigation lead. Over to you, Greg. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Alison Johnston, Licensing Innovation Lead for Taxi Licensing, City of Wolverhampton Council. The report I've got today is the review of Q2 of financial year 2025 to 2026, covering July, August and September. We're reporting to you under delegation of South Staffordshire Council's carriage and private hire licensing function to City of Wolverhampton Council since the 1st of April 2022. So just some key highlights there for Q2 activity. So at our taxi licensing office in Wolverhampton, we're always looking for improvements, particularly to do with health and safety improvements on site. And it's something that we wanted to implement for a while. It did take a while, didn't it? But eventually we've managed to get some parkade like bumper barriers installed on site. We have had a few reports of minor collisions on site, especially around the Bay Area. So this is just another measure that we're putting in just to help keep drivers and workers safe on site. Also, we've been doing a lot of work generally across the council, but particularly in taxi licensing just recently. Again, we're always looking to build resilience across the council and within our services. And we've been doing a lot of work with our business continuity plans recently. We recently held a workshop within taxi licensing to look at what digital-less scenarios may look like, particularly with, you know, we've heard of cyber incidents and such that have happened to many companies recently. But we looked at scenarios that could even include loss of power across the city, for example, and how that would impact our service and how we could work around that. It was ironically actually partially implemented when we had a power cut at the taxi licensing office earlier this month, where we were without power for half a day, was it, I think, in the end. So we had some of that continuity put in place, but then we were up and running. So we've done a lot of work on that recently. We've also been having a lot of discussions with the National Anti-Fraud Network as well. We're undertaking a project with them at the moment. We're aiming to be the first licensing authority to use their API, which is an automated link to their system, which means that whenever we revoke or refuse, then that will automatically go onto the register, as opposed to, at the moment, it's a manual process. And we've had some automated notifications that have been now set up that we don't think were previously working before. So we've highlighted that with them. So that's for when a record for a suspended or revoked driver has been added to the register by another authority and searched for by us, then we get a notification of that person that we've searched for. Also, to follow in another item is an update on the Casey review, which was recently kind of came to a pinnacle for us, where we attended the inquiry down in Parliament last week, and also the written evidence that we've submitted as well. And that's going to continue into a second stage in November. More of that in the next report. So just going through the rest of the Q2 report. So the licence numbers are roughly the same as last quarter for drivers at around 200. They do go up and down slightly with the renewal applications that come in. No licences were refused, none revoked. There's one suspension highlighted there, but that's likely as a result of a road traffic accident. Compliance activity. Again, operations comprise a mix of high visibility operations and operator audits, continuing as usual with no major issues to highlight. And I believe September saw a successful prosecution for an unlicensed operator working out of the Cotswold area. That was following a test purchase operation, and they were fined up £2,000 in costs and fines for that. So those are the key points from Q2. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillors, John, carry on.
Thank you, Chairman. You just mentioned that AMPR. So would you be able to do any vehicle or just taxis?
PR, sorry.
You mentioned that.
API, sorry. It's sorry. Yeah, it's a piece of technology basically that is like a connection between one data set and another data set. So this is where electronically we can upload data. So it's different from AMPR, which are the cameras that recognise registration plates. Sorry.
Health and safety issue. You may have read in the newspapers a few weeks ago about grooming gangs who are being able to use the taxi license that they get at Wolverhampton, places like Plymouth, for instance. Have you got any news on that? I mean, how can all that be stopped by whatever means? I wouldn't know. But have you any news on that? Because you must, as a licensing organisation, you must have been contacted about that.
Thank you. If I can take that one. So just to be clear, the Wolverhampton licensed drivers aren't involved in any of the grooming gang scandals. So I'm not quite sure where that's been pulled from, if that makes sense. If you're saying there was a newspaper article. Okay. Are you saying there was an incident in Plymouth? There was a sexual harassment case. So there was with the CCTV, there was an accusation about the CCTV. So that driver was revoked for that. So that was a Wolverhampton licensed driver that was down in Plymouth, I believe, and there was a suggestion that CCTV would have assisted that, or that there's no requirement for CCTV in Wolverhampton. One of the reasons that we don't have CCTV in Wolverhampton mandated is because we don't think that the cost to the trade, which is in the region of £500, is proportionate to the fact that the CCTV systems can be disabled by the driver at any point in time. If the driver is intending to do something, they can just switch it off. And if you actually read Plymouth CCTV, I can't remember if it's Plymouth or Portsmouth, but if you read the CCTV policy, it very clearly says that it's a condition of the CCTV system that the driver must be able to turn it off. I think that it's pretty pointless asking people to put a £500 system in their car if you're also going to say, but it can be turned off when they're using using the vehicle for personal use. In relation to that specific case, the driver did lose their license, but that was a case of I believe it was sexual harassment. It might have been sexual assault. That was an isolated incident. That was I believe a first time encounter between the driver and the passenger, and we just have to be very, very clear that that type of situation, whilst equally reprehensible, is very different to the grooming gang scandals, where people were using licensed vehicles to traffic young girls and young women over long periods of time, and they were using the vehicles and using free journeys to kind of essentially groom these children. So, as I say, there's no evidence that any of our drivers are involved in grooming gangs or anything like that. We do work with other licensing authorities. That incident down south was an isolated incident, and the driver has lost his license. In terms of the ghost plates, again, we treat that very seriously, and something that is about to come to you for consideration in the next agenda item is specifically to target the ghost plates. So ghost plates are generally used by people who are trying to get out of speeding tickets and bus lane fines, because the infrared cameras that normally, when you get a ticket in the post, those infrared cameras can't read the license plate. Now, all of those ghost plates, they so you have, I presume you've seen the 3D plates and 4D plates that are on the road. Not all of those 3D, 4D plates are ghost plates, but all ghost plates are 3D, 4D plates, because the special material is hidden in the raised part of the license plate. Now, we had bought some very specialist infrared cameras to detect those ghost plates, and we were taking action to review those drivers' licenses. The key problem is that the drivers were coming to the hearings and they were saying, "I didn't know that they were ghost plates. I bought the car and it was just like that." And that was essentially, it's a valid reason. It was essentially impossible for us to disprove that they knew that these 3D plates on the vehicle were ghost plates, because 3D plates are legal. So to put an end to this, basically, in my agenda item next, we are proposing to the committee just to completely ban all 3D plates. Now, there will be a potential impact upon people who have legal 3D plates that aren't ghost plates, because if they don't have the old license plates, they're going to have to go out and buy a new one. But essentially, what your concerns about the ghost plates, if the committee approves the complete prohibition of these 3D plates, it just puts an end to the matter. And anytime we see any of those vehicles with those plates on, we would suspend the license immediately and make them go and buy a new legitimate license plate to put on there. I think if it happened more than once, we'd be looking to suspend or even revoke the driver's license. So I do apologise. There's quite a few different things that you raised in your concerns there, and as I say, I hope that I've done a good job of splitting them out into their components and showing what we're doing. But if I haven't, it's obviously, the grooming gangs and child sex exploitation are, they're kind of the most important thing that we are trying to tackle in the whole world of taxi licensing and compliance. And if I haven't reassured you with the steps that we're doing, please do let me know, because I would like to provide more information on that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Greg. If I could just thank you for doing that, and move to Penny, back to the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. I was about to raise a point of order because we need to go back to the quarterly report. Can I just ask you, please, about the API and the anti-fraud? I'm assuming this is about dirty money, is it? Or is this about fraud actually on fares? What are the instances you're looking at for API?
Thank you. I'll partially answer and then pass over to Greg. The National Anti-Fraud Network, it's the national record of refusals and suspensions and revocations is the register that we're using. So if we revoke a driver or suspend a driver, it's not suspend, it's suspensions now, isn't it? It never used to be suspensions, it is now. So it's refusals, revocations and suspensions. If a driver falls into one of those criteria, one of our drivers, then we add it to that national register. It's now mandated that all authorities do that. However, we've been using it for a long time as a mandatory part of our process anyway. All authorities are meant to add to that register, and it's data sharing essentially, so we can see where a driver has been refused or revoked from another licensing authority, and if they're licensed with us also, we will get that notification. But because of the volume, obviously, of drivers that we deal with, and we have to do this check for every new driver also, what the technology or the API will give us is that automated check as well, and it will notify an officer who will then manually pick it up, and they'll know that if that driver's been refused or revoked from another authority elsewhere, then it flags it to us and vice versa. So the idea being that is that all the authorities are aware as quickly as possible, in as much real time as possible without delay, so that other authorities can act on that information.
Can I ask them, please, what happens if a tax is used in a theft or in a transfer of money or any kind of incidents like that, where the police might be investigating, but the taxi driver themselves has not yet been accused? What happens in those cases?
If I may, Chair, come back on that through you. So, if the police have noticed, it depends. There's obviously so many different scenarios where this could take place. But if the police have notified us, we don't have to wait for an arrest to take place, but they would ordinarily arrest somebody who was involved in it. I'm pleased to say that we've not had any cases in relation to South Staffordshire Council licensed drivers, that type of thing. But yeah, we can arrange an urgent license review if there is any concerns raised to us by the police. And one of the other APIs that Alison implemented was a daily check of the DBS, the criminal records. So we do get notified as early as possible, because some police forces put it on their criminal record under the chief police officer notes. And sorry, if I could just come back to your earlier point as well. So to be very clear, the fraud that was being committed was so drivers were being revoked in one area of the country, and even sometimes literally applying next to their next door neighbour licensing authority, and that they would lie on the application form and they'd say that they hadn't been a licensed driver previously. If they'd have said, for example, oh, I was licensed with Birmingham before, we would always write to Birmingham and ask for their records. But people who were being revoked were just pretending that they'd never been a driver before. So then licensing authorities, ourselves, we did it, and lots of others would, because how were you to know otherwise? It's not practical to contact all 300 licensing authorities every time somebody applies. So that's why they created this register in 2018, and we've used that since 2018. But most importantly, we backdated all of our decisions from 2012 on there. So anybody that we revoked since 2012 is on this register. And as the council started to use it, we started to get a small amount of reports, not lots, but even one's too many. We were notified, oh, by the way, that driver on your records, we revoked him 5 years ago. And then we would hold an urgent license review, and we immediately revoked their licenses in every occasion that I'm aware of. There was sometimes an explanation of, oh, well, I've not caused any trouble for you the 3 years that I've been with you. Just let me carry on. But we were like, no, you gained the license dishonestly. You're not fit and proper, and immediately got rid of them.
Yeah, thank you, Penny, Greg. Councillors, any other questions? Gary?
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in the operator that was fined. It says in Codsall, is it Bilbrook or Codsall? And what was the circumstance? And secondly, is it a single car company or is it a multi-car company? Thank you.
I'm just reluctant to about how much detail we would be able to release. So I might need to get some legal advice and perhaps brief you separately about it, because obviously there's a named individual, but it was in court. So it was an operator that had multiple vehicles. Well, the point is that they weren't licensed, but it was a multiple vehicle, operation job. It wasn't just a one-man band, so to speak, if that makes sense.
How long had it been operating? Do you know?
I can give some details. They were previously a licensed operator, and then your subcommittee removed their license, but they continued to operate for several months, and we received a tip-off. Now, again, whilst it was an unlicensed operation, we didn't receive any complaints as such that there was any public safety issue in relation to that.
Anything else, councillors? Anything? No? Thank you. If I could move to note the report, please, councillors. Right. All right. Thank you. Moving on to item 5 on the agenda. And over to you again, Greg.
Thank you, Chair. So bringing this back to the committee, we had this consultation proposing changes to, we did a whole review of the policies and the processes. And again, this is because we always want to stay abreast of any changes in best practice guidance. So normally it's the government guidance that we're trying to implement. We implemented the government statutory standard and their best practice guidance. As far as I know, we were the first licensing authority to do that in the country. The reason for the review this time was the Institute of Licensing. Although it's not a government body, it's certainly a trade organisation that most of the licensing authorities are a member of, and they issued new suitability guidance on what they think a fit and proper person to hold a license should be. So we did a wholesale review of all of our policies and license conditions, and we've got quite a few changes. We tied that in with a few other things that we wanted to do. So one of the key things was every single council in the country has a different set of license conditions. Not for any real good reason, and we've done a lot of work in West Mercia, with Shropshire and Telford as well, and across the whole of the West Midlands, Solihull, Wolverhampton, Walsall, Birmingham, trying to agree a common set of licence conditions to make it easier for the trade, particularly those operators who are using drivers across a wide area. So that's what I'm bringing back to the committee today. I'll run through some of the key changes to bring them to or key proposals to bring them to your attention. We did a bit of a pilot scheme a few months ago, looking at the age. So on every tyre, there's what they call a dot code, and it includes the month and the year that the tyre was manufactured. We were alerted to an issue with people they were changing the tyres that were on their vehicle to come for the inspection and then changing them back again later on. So we weren't happy about that because we're not actually seeing the tyres that are on there. And we found a vehicle with 19-year-old tyres on it. These tyres were basically only being used once a year to come to the for the inspection. So we're proposing today that there's an age limit on tyres. The research online indicates that tyres start to degrade between about 5 and 10 years. Most people, their tyres won't even last that long anyway that are buying new tyres. So we think that it's reasonable to say that tyres shouldn't be any more than 10 years old on a licensed vehicle. I don't think that the public would expect the tyres to be that old either. It's not just about tyre tread; it's about the condition of the rubber. We're also, this is something, I know Councillor Allen that you raised this before, I believe, about the one-sided doors and public safety concerns about whether or not they should be allowed. We've reviewed a lot of research and listened to a lot of people that have fed back, and we think that the issue, although that there is a risk of there being an issue from vehicles with passenger doors on only one side, the restrictions to the trade about which wheelchair accessible vehicles that they can purchase, that's a bigger issue. So we are proposing that the trade should be allowed to purchase those vehicles to give a much wider variety of wheelchair accessible vehicles that they can license. Another key change is that it has often been said that other councils don't implement an ultra low emission vehicle policy in their area because they're concerned that if they did, that their trade would leave and come to Wolverhampton. So we're proposing a bit of a proactive policy from 2030. So it would be plenty of time for the trade to adjust this, and it would be affecting new vehicle license applications. But those the vehicles from 2030 would need to be ultra low emission. Now, the government had originally said that from 2030 manufacturers shouldn't be making internal combustion engine vehicles, and despite them now pushing that back to 2035, I understand that a lot of the manufacturers are still sticking to that 2030 deadline anyway. It is in 5 years' time, but I think that we want to give people plenty of advance warning that this is what we'd like to do. But we are going to review the situation in 2028, so essentially 3 years' time, to see if all of the other councils are implementing similar policies, because we want to make sure that there's a level playing field for the trade, and equally that if there's a restriction here, which is overly onerous about ultra low emission vehicles, that all of the trade here don't just flock to another licensing authority, because then you lose control of your trade as well. So it's quite a big change, but it has a very big pressure release valve safety catch in 3 years' time, and there'll be another review paper brought back to the committee for the kind of almost like the final decision. But it's a very clear statement of intent that we would like people to start investing in the ultra low emission vehicles. Another key change is that people who've had convictions for drink driving or drug driving, that they would need to provide a drugs test when they apply for their license to prove that they're clear of drugs now, and that was in their in their long history. Because obviously at the moment we do take it on face value that people, if they said that they've got 7 years ago, 8 years ago, that they had a drug driving conviction, but there's been no other offences since then. But the Institute of Licensing say that you should make those people pay for a drugs test before you grant them a licence. That's all fine. Something that we've not experienced yet, but there was perhaps a bit of a gap in our guidelines, is about the trafficking using the small boats over into the UK. There were some new offences that were being considered, and I've proposing to put it into the guidelines that if anybody is convicted of these immigration-related offences, that South Staffordshire Council would never normally grant them a licence. There's not like in 10 years you'll be okay. The kind of general rule is going to be never for somebody who's convicted of those offences. Let's have a look. And then, as mentioned, the license conditions are being changed, and this is something that came out of the good working that we had. Although it would be unlawful for drivers who are on the barred lists to work as a licensed driver. It wasn't in the license conditions that they are actually required to notify the council. So we've added that in there so that it's a condition of license breach as well. Additionally, if the vehicle was seized by the police, at the moment there's not a duty upon people to notify the licensing authority, whereas we're proposing that there would be. And the license condition that you mentioned previously about reporting safeguarding concerns, we've added that in there, and I think that that's a particularly relevant license condition after what happened in Southport with Gary Poland, and the police at the time said that he didn't have a duty of care. There wasn't any. He's not broken any laws, or he didn't breach any license conditions by not telling anybody, but I believe that it was 50 minutes before he alerted the authorities to what had happened. So the proposed license conditions are, if there's a safeguarding concern or a public safety concern, that you have to tell people as soon as possible. So that would actually, we're proposing that staffs actually does put that duty in the license conditions on license holders. Yeah, that's fine. I mentioned the 3D plates in the previous item, so we're proposing that there's a complete ban on that. That's all fine. And if an operator, so sometimes an operator will have a driver who does school transport jobs, and there'll be like an issue at the school, and then the operator might stop working with that driver. We want the operator to tell us straight away, because if one of your schools is not, there we go. If one of your schools isn't allowing a driver to transport children anymore, there's got to be a very good reason for that. So we would like to know that. So that's going to be on the operator. There's going to be a duty for the operator to notify us of that. So that's kind of a bit of a flavour of some. So quite, more changes than we would normally bring to committee, but I would like to think all sensible proposals that seem reasonable. The recommendations are before you in the paper, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Any questions, councillors? Chris?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple of questions on the report. Thank you for the comprehensive report, both written and verbal. The first one is on 3.719, which talks about the information, the licensing. I think you've covered that in your verbal report. So thank you for that. And then 3.10L, specifically, this talks about the charging points and proprietors of licensed vehicles installing charging points in their homes ready for the potentially quite quick conversion to electric vehicles. And 3.10L says that there is no funding available to support this installation. I was just wondering, is there anything that we can do? Because we've got these people working as taxi drivers, providing a very valuable service. They're being told by national government that they've got to go to electric vehicles. Is there anything that we can do to support them in getting the infrastructure that they need to be able to electrically fuel their vehicles, for want of a better term? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. So at Wolverhampton, we looked into this, and I've no reason to believe that it would be any different in South Staffs. And we weren't looking at it from the charge point of view. We were looking at it in terms of a discounted license fee for ultra low emission vehicles, and the legal advice that we had was that it would be unlawful to discount the fee in such a way, because essentially the license fee money that we have, we hold in trust for the trade, and it would be it's not lawful to use the license fee money from one section of the trade to then subsidise another part of the trade. So in terms of something that we in licensing could do in terms of offering grants, that's a no from us. However, as a wider authority, that I think that would be a matter for South Staffordshire Council to decide. But I don't even know necessarily that it would be this committee's remit to approve the funding for that. So what I might say is that although it's it's not something that we would consider at this committee, I'm happy to speak to Lee afterwards, and maybe we can have a discussion about doing that. But the item L was about supporting purchasing the vehicles. I do believe that there are some, or certainly there was some grant funding from central government to actually install the charger at home. But again, there are other complexities with that. Some people don't have a driveway. Some people live in a block of flats. So there are a few issues on that. But it's whether or not that's the barrier. The main issue that we see is that the barrier to buying an ultra low emission vehicle is the initial upfront cost, and that's why in a previous committee meeting the committee agreed that there would be no age limit on an ultra low emission vehicle, so that the cost of purchasing that could essentially be spread over many years of the driver using that vehicle in the trade.
Councillor?
Thank you, Chairman. It was a sad night last night because I read this page by page. And I agree with the licence, the DBS and the health certificate. But it said, and I can't find it now, a standard of English. But then I thought, well, what is a standard of English? Do they take an oral test, a written test, a test? So can you just clarify this standard of English? Because I use taxis all the time. And basically, it just says, where you going, Johnny? And I go, and he puts the postcode in, the job done.
That's an excellent question, because I'm always happy to discuss this and dispel the rumours that are often said. We've been accused of providing the training in foreign languages, that there's no English test whatsoever, all of this kind of nonsense. It's not true, and it's never been true. So the section that I think that you might be referencing is, and I'm happy to read it out. So we've written it in our council guidelines so that people are clear in terms of what they're going to be expected to do if they want to be a licensed driver. So it says Hackney Carriage and private hire drivers' English must be sufficient to understand written documents such as policies and guidance, including any relating to the protection of children and vulnerable adults. They must be able to identify and act upon signs of potential exploitation through communicating with passengers and their interaction with others. Drivers are required to demonstrate an understanding of the desired destination, an estimation of the time taken to get there, as well as other common passenger requests, and for the driver to provide a legibly written receipt upon request. Inadequate English may result in refusal to grant or renew, suspension or immediate revocation of a license. So there is a training program that we run every day, every weekday, and the assessor will speak to every single candidate and make sure that they can hold a conversation and that they can understand what they're talking about. And then at the end of the day, there's a test that's written in English that they have to be able to understand. And then they also have to write this receipt to show that they can you know, the trainer will tell them what to write on the receipt, and then they've got to be able to write it. And unfortunately, some people do fail that. I saw one recently where they couldn't spell Bilston. They'd just written a completely different word. And I don't think Bilston's too exotic a word to be able to spell. So they failed the test.
Is there any more questions? Councillor Allen?
Thank you. First of all, DBS. I recently found myself in a situation where I was registering for Companies House, and at the same time, it popped up on the information that I could actually buy a DBS online. So I trialed it to see what it was like. It cost £21.50, and it simply checked my criminal record. It did not check anything else, did not ask for any referee. And I had the certificate immediately given to me online, and then I received a paper copy of it 3 days later. If this is being used by someone who has, for instance, come in from abroad or from another place in the EU, or from any associated authority, then it's certainly, to my mind, not providing an adequate check for taxi drivers. In order to have an enhanced DBS, which is something that I require for my work in the diocese, I have to have referees who know about my conduct, my attitude, and something about my level of intelligence. Now, if people are using this DBS as a checker, to my mind, it's not very adequate. And when I looked at the question 25, I think it is, certificate of good conduct from abroad, I wondered how on earth you're going to check that. And I also wondered whether some people are simply buying this DBS, and if they have no criminal record in this country, are they able to apply as a taxi driver? To my mind, I'm saying this as a retired teacher who is very aware that children are frequently taken from care homes to their particular school to further their education. Children often find themselves alone without an adult in a taxi for school services and for doctor's services as well. And those kind of services should, to my mind, always be subject to an enhanced DBS check. And if so, how would you affirm that for people?
Thank you. And again, I'm grateful for the opportunity to provide more information on this. So the DBS certificate that you will have purchased was a basic one. So there's basic, standard, enhanced, and then the top one is an enhanced with barred list checks. And because taxi licensing was made a regulated activity for the purposes of a piece of legislation which allows those checks to be done, because you can't apply for one of these certificates without, you know, working in that area. Those are the that's the check that is applied for. If anybody applied, sorry, for drivers, we have a lower for vehicle proprietors, but they're just the ones who own the vehicles. The actual drivers themselves have to have the enhanced with barred list checks. So yeah, I don't believe that they need to provide a reference for that, but anybody who has spent time overseas, more than 3 months overseas, we require these certificates of good conduct. There are limits to this, with, you know, the same with any kind of documentation and work that we do in public authorities. If somebody's going to lie to us, you know, it's very difficult for us to disprove that. We have to take certain things at face value. However, you know, that's why we do a lot of the other proactive work, working with the police, working with the Home Office, that if we are notified that there is an issue or somebody's not what they say they are, or their background isn't as crystal clear as that they've intimated to us, then we can take prompt action to revoke the license and potentially even prosecute somebody as well. I'm always very grateful that you're thinking well ahead with all of these questions, but I can reassure you that with the South Staffordshire drivers and trade, that this isn't a problem that I'm aware of we've experienced at all. The South Staffordshire trade are excellent, and I've not quite any concerns about their background or time spent overseas.
Penny?
I'm sorry, I've got several things to ask you. Next one, vehicles with doors on one side. Can I be assured that those doors will be on the pavement side, the near side of the vehicle, so that anyone entering or exiting that vehicle will not be in the position where they're getting out on the side of traffic passing by?
So unfortunately, Councillor, I actually can't offer that reassurance because that would just depend upon which side of the road the vehicle has pulled up on. And obviously in some countries they do have laws that say that, you know, if you're driving on the left, you've got to park facing on the left. But in the UK, obviously it's perfectly legal for you to pull over on the other side of the road and park there. But, you know, what I can say is that if they are getting out into traffic, which obviously is a dangerous activity, that's no greater danger whether there's one door or two doors. You know, if there's two doors, the person can still get out into traffic. But I think that there is a new license condition that we've proposed, if I remember rightly. Give me 1 second. Yeah, so drivers are required to ensure that the driver must ensure, here we go. When the driver journey is completed, the driver must ensure that all passengers have safely exited the vehicle away from traffic, along with all of their luggage, mobility aids and pushchairs, etc., before setting off. So there is a duty on the driver to kind of make sure that, you know, he's not stopping in the on the motorway, turfing people out there, which obviously is illegal. But you know, and again, so something that we've tried to do previously is, and I would say that this is a bit more of a public safety campaign, and when I say public safety, I mean in relation to the actual public, the passengers, is the drivers have very little control over this. But it's not uncommon for passengers, when they're nearly at their destination and the driver pulls up to it, some red lights, the passengers say, "Oh, we'll just get out here, mate. You know, we're fine," and they just jump out, and they're jumping out into live traffic. You know, potentially there could be a motorcyclist who's filtering legally between the traffic, and they could end up having an accident there. We did a public safety video about dooring of cyclists, people just opening their car door without looking into it. So I think that everybody has a role to play here. And yes, we would hope that that drivers park safely to allow people to alight carefully. But I would also encourage passengers not to get out of the vehicle before their driver has correctly parked.
Thank you. Next thing. I note from the consultations that you've taken place that some of the consultees are not very happy to declare their immigration status. And quite a number of them have said that they were not happy about this. So in the case of somebody refusing to declare their immigration status, what is the action that you can take?
So I think that there are what I will describe as valid, if unfounded, concerns that people have about their immigration status, and sharing that with other people. Fear of being discriminated against, for example. So when we originally, a few years ago, brought in this requirement for people to provide these overseas background checks, There were unfortunately accusations that this was a racist policy and it had been brought in deliberately to discriminate and to remove overseas people born overseas from the trade. That's completely not true. Obviously, we want to make sure that people are undergoing proper background checks. Now, we do their right to work status, and when we're checking their right to work, we do that in person at our offices where we can see that. So that's a part of getting the license. One of the kind of sticking points, I'll say, is if somebody's been granted refugee status, we're very careful with those applicants. And if somebody's been granted refugee status from another country, we wouldn't expect them to then have to provide the criminal record background check from that country, because the Home Office accepts that there might be an incentive for the political regime in that country to lie and to generate up something about their background to, at the very least, inconvenience them, if not in the hope that we would deport that person back to the country where they would then face repercussions for something they might have, done rightly, but against that government's interests many years ago. So there are a few things that we can do in terms of checking people, but everybody has to have the right to work in the UK to be granted the license.
There's a further thing at 1.8 about individuals' attitude and temperament, and I wondered how you were assessing that.
Yes. Well, in the license hearing, if the person is quite rude, and obviously it's down to personal, it is a subjective thing, but if we have people who are aggressive or rude in a license hearing, they've not broken a law, but you think, well, hang on a second. If we're at what is, a form of job interview and you're being rude to us when we're deciding whether or not you're fit and proper, how are you going to be to your customers? When there's a bit of difficulty, there's some roadworks and there's a diversion, or you're being asked to make an additional stop when you hadn't planned to stop, and you're going busy later on. We want to make sure that they are calm, and that's kind of the temperament there, that they're not being rude or aggressive. So there's not a specific test for that, but if we think that the applicant isn't suited to this line of work, then if we refuse the application, we might make reference to that in court. And I have made reference to that specific guideline in court on several occasions. But it usually becomes apparent in the court hearing itself, because they tend to talk back to the judge or to the benches when they're being told things. So, the way that you do anything is the way that you do everything.
Thank you. You're running well. I think the last thing, I do actually think that all the amendments that have been made in red writing are, generally speaking, quite wholesale. There was a phrase, however, which I would pull you up about, which is 234 in the round, when you're judging a case or a person in a round. That is not a legal phrase, and I think that's something which you might want to alter to something like as a whole. There's always a difficulty when you're pursuing guidelines and they're not legal. And I think that's one of the guidelines which you might want to look at. My other radio alarm was about the number of people who didn't think it was important to report about drugs. Only 78% of the persons responding said that that was an important thing to report. I think, having been driven in London several times by persons with alcohol cans rattling around their feet, and also been suspicious about somebody being under the influence in the way that they were driving. I think the people are not to want to report that and not to want to say to you openly, you know, I have a problem, even if it's a temporary one. There's always going to be difficulty, isn't there, for you in those circumstances. So yes, but on the whole, yes, thank you. I did wonder, my last question was really about the offences, the numbers of years for different offences. I'm assuming they've all had a legal time, 7 years, 10 years and 12 years. I assume they're all tied into law.
They are, they've been reviewed in line with the Department for Transport statutory standards and the Institute of Licensing suitability guidance. Those are generally the timescales. We do depart, and I'd like to use this example. For example, a lot of other councils, they treat possession of weapons equally. So they say 7 years, but we treat possession of the firearm more seriously than possession of a knife. So we would say 10 years for the firearm. So there are some slight discrepancies, but yeah, they're not coming specifically from legislation as such, but certainly from guidance and what other councils doing. And we do kind of benchmark them against other councils. I'm not aware that ours are that there are other councils that are stricter than our guidelines. And the phrasing on in the round is I'm going to throw the migrant criminality policy team at UK visas and immigration under the bus or under the taxi, because that's their wording. I extracted that from the grounds for refusal relating to criminality for visas. So like what you said about, is it come from legislation? I always, rather than reinvent the wheel, try and look at other public bodies' guidance and their ways of working and just replicate it here. You know, well, why should we be making our own things up when there's already other people who are doing very similar jobs? So that's where in the round comes from. If you want to adjust the grammar, then it can be done, but I would just leave it so it's consistent with the government guidance. But up to you, Councillor.
Sorry, that's a document I haven't read.
Well, Penny, fantastic questions, and thank you. Absolutely. From a little bit back, I deal with DBS every day, and that's to change the guidelines that work so that every driver gets to visit schools and clinics and hospitals. Got to have a DBS check, current, before we even interview them, kind of thing. So very good, Penny. Thank you for your questions today. Very good. I'll quickly, if there's no more questions, I'm just going to move on to approving 8.1 to 8.7. Would you all approve that for me, please? Thank you very much. And also to note, 8.8 is one to note, councillors. Right. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. We'll just move on to the next on the agenda, which I'm sure is back to Greg. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I won't spend too much time on this because it's very difficult to summarise any more than what's actually written in the report. This is the information that the council submitted to the inquiry. Sorry, actually, was this is it me who's presenting this? Because I've got it's a report of the Environmental Health Policy and Contracts Officer. Are you? Okay, so okay, that's fine. I'll carry on presenting. Apologies. So when the government, so Baroness Casey released the results of her audit, and there was a recommendation in there to tackle cross-bordering and out of area working. the government announced an inquiry, and then they were requesting submissions. Wolverhampton wrote some written submissions. Obviously, you don't have the same problems in South Staffordshire. You have what I would call a normal amount of drivers and don't particularly attract a significant number of people from out of area, whereas Wolverhampton, 96% of our licensed drivers are out of area. And all of the detail that we could possibly manage whilst keeping it concise is in that document. We're really pleased on it. It took us several months to write and to finesse, and what we were asking for the government to help support and change, but also to provide a bit of background that we can't refuse these applications from people elsewhere in the country, much in the same way that the DVLA can't just say, oh, there's too many drivers on the road, we're not going to give any new driving licenses out. It's very much the same as that. The fact that we're a council is almost kind of incidental to that. People associate councils with the local area, but the regime that we worked under, or that we work under, is a national regime, and legally anybody can apply to any council from a license anywhere in the country. Historically, it was just easier to go to your local authority. So we submitted that to the inquiry. My chief operating officer presented oral evidence at the inquiry last week. I would highly recommend that you watch that. It's really interesting. You can watch it online on Parliament TV. And he's explained exactly what we think is wrong with the licence regime. And we will expect to see some changes or some recommendations, certainly, from the inquiry, I'd say in the next 6 months. And when we hear back from that, that will be likely the biggest changes to the regime in 50 years. So that will be back before the committee, but I expect that there'll be a relatively long implementation period as well. Things aren't going to change overnight for that, but we very much look forward to seeing where the taxi licensing goes next with these following this inquiry. So as I say, the recommendation or the report's before you, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions on the inquiry that I can. Thank you.
Do you have any questions, councillors? Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I've got a few questions on this one. The first ones are on the finance. There's two of these, so I'll say these together. Question A, in relation to the 60 pence charge. Say that that the government shouldn't charge that. That's to go to the DVLA to get the information. But my concern with that is there's then an expense on the taxpayer, nationally or locally, the ratepayer. That 60p would help to alleviate, as it would be recuperated via the licensing charge, and in turn via fares. It would be recuperated by actual service users rather than pressure on public finances. Related to that, in question E, state that fees.
Chris, if you could go one question at a time, kind of thing. Just put the question to the officer.
Okay, yes, that's fine.
Thank you. Sorry, I have a very short memory and struggle to think of two things at once. So yes, it's a good point. We've spoken a lot about APIs, these connections between computer databases today. We've already referenced that we have one with the DBS that we check every single day. That's provided free of charge by the DBS. The one that Alison's working to set up with NAFN, National Anti-Fraud Network, for the National Register of Refusals, Revocations and Suspensions, that will be free as well. The DVLA have had this system for quite some time, and for some reason they choose to charge 60 pence per inquiry. I'm not quite sure why they charge, but there is a big business in the private sector of offering checks of people's driving licenses for fleet companies and various other transport industry services where the DVLA are charging these 60 pence. Now, I'll go out on a limb and say that I don't think it costs them 60 pence to do that. And we, as a licensing authority, if we were going to implement this check, we would start off with doing it annually, and I think that we might be able to progress to doing it every 6 months. But I think that it should be being done every single day. I would want to know, within 24 hours, if somebody has been convicted of a motoring conviction, if somebody has been disqualified from driving, or if their license has been revoked on medical grounds. And I appreciate that there may be a cost to that, and this is something that licensing authorities perhaps need to work with the DVLA about. But I think in the interests of public safety, the DVLA should be telling licensing authorities as soon as they can if somebody, there's this information that means they're no longer fit and proper. At the moment, we're entirely dependent upon the honesty of the trade to tell us, and it could be, a year before we find out, upon us doing this manual check of their license. Everyone's budgets are stretched, aren't they? So it is difficult, but at the moment, 60 pence is cost prohibitive. And if I just off the quick top of my head so that would be, if we did a check every week, every working day, you're looking at about £135 per driver. Well, that's more than they pay to the council for the driving licence fee. So it would double the cost. So which is why at the moment we don't do it, because it's just cost prohibitive. But I don't believe that it would cost the DVLA £135 per person to notify us when there was information on the driving licence.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. Next question is very similar to that. It's on finances. You're saying, question E, that fees should be set nationally. My question is, are we sure that we want to lose control of this, especially with local government finances being so tight? Wouldn't we want to get the fees in ourselves and keep the money rather than it going to national government?
So I think that there is if we have nationally set fees, then it removes any argument about that people are going to one area because they're cheaper than in another area. I would like to think, so we have a bit of a precedent for this in the Licensing Act, in that those fees are nationally set, but it also is a case study about when it goes terribly, terribly wrong. I think I'm correct in saying that it's not my main area of licensing, but I'm pretty sure that the Licensing Act fees haven't been increased in 20 years. And I think that if fees are to be set nationally, that they should be either they increase in line with inflation or they're at least reviewed annually. You kind of like need when you're calculating the fees, you'd need like a core element for things that you definitely need to do in terms of processing the application, enforcement, and some compliance work. But I think that licensing authorities, obviously, again, we're not allowed to make a profit, but you could certainly flex the amount of proactive work that you did. And if your budgets looked like they were coming in under, and you were forecasting an underspend for that year, that you could then increase the amount of proactive work that the officers do with the police, doing test purchases for applying for hire, going to the schools and checking the limos that are taking the children there. You can always scale up enforcement and compliance work if you've got more money. So I don't think that there would only be money kind of going to waste. But I think that we would need that, I would argue, annual review of fees nationally to ensure that councils aren't struggling and left behind, because the ring fencing of fees should work both ways. You know, councils aren't allowed to profit, but then it shouldn't be that taxpayers, council taxpayers are then propping up the licensing of a regime which is profit generating in its own industry.
Thank you. Thanks for that comprehensive question answer. My final question is to do with, there's a response to both question D and H about drivers accused but not convicted of rape, and it's a similar angle to Councillor Allen was going on about the legalities of this. And rape accusations are a very sensitive area, and the circumstances where there might not be a charge or a conviction, but there's an accusation, there can be a myriad of reasons for that. And I am concerned that this answer is saying that simply because a driver is accused of rape, then they should be banned from ever holding a taxi license for 99 years. I may have read that wrong. That would go against the English law principle of innocent until proven guilty, and I'm pretty sure there'd be human rights implications on that. I want to see women protected, as well as men who are falsely accused. So I was just wondering what the background to that answer was, where there's not been a conviction. What investigations would be carried out to ensure that the council could then stand and say you can't act as a licence holder, even though you've not been convicted of any crime in the court, you've not gone through any other investigatory process, in order for us to soundly be able to say that one.
Thank you again, Chair, through you. So obviously, we Article 6 of human rights relates to right to a fair trial, right to fair hearing. So where there is an accusation made against somebody, we would hold a licence review hearing, and then the driver would be able to attend that hearing, and they would have the opportunity to have legal representation there, and then we would weigh up the evidence as to whether or not we thought that the accusation was credible before making a decision on whether or not they were fit and proper. The 11 years and 99 years, so the serious problem that we have is this register of revoked drivers was brought in 2018, and the rule was that people would stay on the register for 25 years. It was a voluntary register for councils to use it. We chose to use it, and we've used it ever since, but some councils didn't use it, which was very frustrating, because if a driver was revoked in their area, they'd just come and apply to us, and we would grant the license and not know. So the government included it in a piece of legislation in 2022, and then from, I think it was in, I can't remember if it was in 22 or 23, but they set a date, and from that date, all of the decisions needed to be recorded on the register. But they weakened the register and said after 11 years, the details get deleted. Now, I think that's completely wrong. If it's important enough for it to be considered, and I've used, the example of this rape allegation from 2013 to take it to its extreme, and this is because only 2% of rape complaints result in a conviction. So obviously there's a problem with the actual conviction proven beyond reasonable doubt, but I highly doubt that 98% truly didn't happen. That I want to know even if, so somebody was a driver in 1985 and they lost their job because somebody made a complaint to the council and to the police, but then when it came to the court date, and it was too harrowing for them to give evidence, and then the case collapsed, which has been known to happen, and the person was acquitted, or there was found no case to answer, so there's no conviction on there. I would still want to know, and depending upon the strength of the evidence, I would be minded to refuse an application if we had sufficient evidence that that complaint was credible, even decades ago. And I don't think that 11 years is long enough. I was shocked that they reduced it from 25 years to 11 years, and I'm saying 99 years to cover any reasonable lifespan. I don't know of any drivers that are working past 100, but I might be proven wrong.
Any more questions, councillors? Penny?
Thank you. Can I just ask, this whole thing with DBS, as we know, takes interminable times often. You're referencing up to 6 months, in my own experience, a year. Are you making a protest to central government about DBS checking? Because I think that's fundamental, really, to us all operating in safety.
I mean, I'm happy to use the platform that I have in this meeting to complain. I've raised it with the Department for Transport, and I generally raise it at a lot of meetings. The example that I given just of this year, and it wasn't the most serious offence. It didn't result in a custodial sentence. But the driver was convicted in December, and it didn't appear on his DBS certificate until July. So we've built this system to check every single day, and the problem is I don't quite know where the breakdown is. There's a lot of government bodies that this is passing through. There's the police, there's the Crown Prosecution Service, there's the Courts and Tribunal Service, there's the DBS. There's just lots of different people, and there's lots of databases, the Police National Computer. There's lots of, I think that's probably adds to the complexity of it, but for me, it's not acceptable that it takes months for us to be notified, for someone's criminal record to be updated. I can't see of any real reason why, if somebody is convicted on a Monday, that doesn't show on their record by the Friday at the very latest. It can't be that it's that complicated to be convicted and then the records to be updated. And look, I know that people, they've got appeals and that sometimes convictions are quashed, but at that point in time, we have a right to know that information urgently, and it should not be taking months.
Well, just to add to your, I think, objection about this, to say to you that teaching staff and teaching assistants obviously require these pieces of paper before they can begin their employment. And they are finding those kind of delays sometimes, where they've passed an interview for a job, but they can't produce the relevant certificates. And I think that's a gross negligence on the government's part when we're looking for people to help us in all kinds of directions. Thank you.
Any more questions? Councillor?
Just to say, when you have your DBS, and I think I'm going to make 4 or 5, you can pay for them to be done quicker. I feel it's wrong, but if you're a school governor, foster father, fire, anything to do with fire, or councillor or parish, you can have 5 or 6, and I think 5 or 6 is wrong. There should be one station anywhere in this country, and you should be able to phone up and say, has this person got a DBS? And they say, yes, it's easy. But instead, you have to have half a dozen for it's wrong. It's wrong. So complain.
Thank you, councillor. Councillors, I'd just like you to note the item just presented by Craig. Right, thank you. On that note, Greg. I'd like to thank you on behalf of us for all the good work and responses you've given today. Absolutely fabulous. Thank you. And on that, I'll move to agenda number 7 and an update of the annual report of the Corporate Director of Finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the annual report to provide an update on the Council's responsibilities and activities under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000, which we know better as RIPA. As a public authority, we must comply with RIPA when undertaking covert surveillance as part of criminal investigations, and oversight sits with this committee. The Council continues to enforce legislation robustly, for example, in relation to fly tipping, planning breaches and food safety. However, covert surveillance is only ever used as a last resort. In practice, the use of RIPA remains unlikely, although staff are regularly reminded of the need to consider it in any criminal investigation. As members may recall, we have adopted a process for using covert CCTV for fly tipping operations that doesn't require RIPA authorisation. This is because the images obtained do not capture private information as defined by the Act. Any proposed surveillance is still assessed to ensure that human rights considerations are addressed. The corporate policy and guidance document on RIPA has been reviewed as part of this annual update, and the policy is annexed to this report. No changes have been identified other than to update the review date. Members are therefore asked to note the contents of this report and to approve the RIPA policy and guidance document attached as Appendix 1. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a very quick question is, when was the CCTV last used? Not where, when?
Apologies, it's not my field. I could get back to you with an answer on that. I'm aware it's a camera that does move around the district.
Penny?
Thank you. Just to ask about this covert surveillance of social networking sites. Because from what I'm looking at on page 145 at the moment, it's the responsibility of an individual to set privacy settings to protect unsolicited access to private information. In other words, it's our responsibility to check that we've got privacy settings set on our own devices. That's really what it's saying. If we're actually going to social networking sites, it seems to me that actually it will be more appropriate if our privacy settings were set before we were given the computers, in the sense that some people may be looking at things which we don't know about. When we hand our computers in, obviously the technical staff will know, but it is possible that somebody might be networking with somebody inappropriate or doing something inappropriate with their equipment, which we wouldn't want them to be doing. So setting our own privacy settings seems to be a rather strange thing for what is office work. So can I just draw that to your attention to note, please, for the technical department, have a little think about that. Sometimes we do receive communications from outside bodies which are normally flagged for us on the Outlook system, but not within social networking sites. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, councillors. I'll take both of those points back.
Any more questions? Megan, I'm sure you've got something to say. Thank you.
It's unusual, I know. No, Greg, and you're very capable lady with you. I would just like to say thank you so much for today. It's been very informative. I know we always make you earn your money when you come here, and you know, I hope you look forward to coming to see us, but thank you very much indeed. We do appreciate, you know, the full extent of your answers, and you never seem to be short of words, Greg. I'll say that for you. Thanks very much.
Okay, and then councillors, is that everybody at the top table happy? Happy? Greg, you happy? All round? And I'd like to thank you all for attending what was thoroughly entertaining and very good. So on that note, thank you.